With so much promising news coming out of COVID-19 vaccine trials, a lot of companies are starting to plan ahead. Australian airline Qantas says in future it will only allow passengers on its flights if they can show that they have been vaccinated against COVID-19. But with so many looking to get protection from the virus, lawyers are concerned that not enough attention is being paid to what happens if something goes wrong. Joining us now is personal injury lawyer Jasmine Daya. Good to have you with us on Your Morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you here to answer these questions. The federal government has said it does not plan on making vaccines mandatory here, but businesses, hotels and schools, are they legally allowed to make that decision for themselves?
Each of those areas have to make their own decisions, and the law that applies is slightly different for each. So with respect to employers, it is going to be extremely difficult for them to implement a rule that requires their employees to have the vaccine as a mandatory requirement. It raises ethical issues. They would also have to provide access to the vaccine, which may not be easy. We have yet to see how that's going to happen. And it could create a PR nightmare. There's also, from a legal perspective, liability exposure. So if something were to go wrong, the employer could have potentially opened themselves up to a lawsuit. With respect to hotels, slightly different. According to the president and CEO of the Canadian Hotel Association, she recently stated that about 50% of the 8,300 hotels across Canada that employ 300,000 people are at risk of closing. I'm not sure that they will want to add this extra layer that may deter people from staying at their hotels. Enforcement would also be extremely difficult. I think that it would have to be a government-mandated program if hotels were to fall under the mandatory vaccine requirement. In terms of schools, again, very different. There is a list of immunizations that are required for children who attend primary and secondary education with exemptions. So there are exceptions to the rule, and the exemptions are for things like religious beliefs or medical reasons, for example. So if we were to see a mandatory requirement for school-age children, it could happen, but it wouldn't happen anytime soon because we want to see first how things go with the vaccine. In terms of children, we know that COVID-19 doesn't affect them as much. The immunization program for children is really to protect children and to create herd immunity. And I don't think that would be rushed out for children.
All right, well, even before the vaccine is distributed, what legal protection will vaccine companies want to have before they agree to make their drugs widely available?
So Canada has already entered into contracts with various manufacturers. And in terms of those contracts, oftentimes there's immunity or indemnity agreements. This is not really exposed to the public. We're not a party to those conversations, obviously, for various reasons. However, what that would mean is that if the manufacturer supplies Canada with the vaccine, they have a contract, and in the contract, there's likely an immunity clause that means that if something goes wrong, if there's adverse effects, then the government will indemnify the manufacturer. What that means is that the legal bill will be paid for by the government, and if there's any cost award, the government would be the one to pay.
Really quickly, I want to get this last question in. Canada does not have a vaccine injury compensation program right now, but Quebec does. So why is there more protection in that province?
That's a very good question. There was a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada in Quebec, and it was after that case that there was unfair finding because it's very hard to be successful. And in fact, in Canada, there hasn't been a publicly known successful case against a vaccine manufacturer for long-term side effects that could arise. And so after this case, Quebec said, well, it's unfair. We need to have a program. It's a no-fault scheme. Canada, aside from Quebec, is the only G7 country that does not have a vaccine injury program. So perhaps something we should be considering.
Great information to have, taking a look at the legal side and all the implications. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.